just want to introduce our next speaker, Divya. So Divya is a postdoc here at the Martinos Center, working with both me and with Bruce Fischel. She's been developing a lot of methods for high-resolution anatomical imaging, high-resolution functional imaging, both conventional methods and methods based on AI. And so today she's going to be talking to us about EPI distortion curves.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. As John mentioned, I'm a postdoc with him, and I'm going to be talking about EPI distortion correction. So before we begin this talk, EPI distortion correction is a very well-researched topic. You know, you have decades and decades long literature to span through. So one thing that I've really tried to do is, while we will go through classical methods and get a high-level overview on all of the approaches, we will limit our conversation to high-resolution functional imaging, because I think that's what is of interest to this group. Second thing is, I think everyone here might have heard of distortion mapped fMRI, or like working in the EPI space, right? Like let everything be distorted the same way. There is going to be a talk on that, but very specifically, that's not something I'm going to address here. I'm going to be talking purely on distortion correction. And I do want to point out, if you are interested in geometric accuracy, which you should be if you're interested in laminar imaging and layers, then working in the EPI space might not offer you the geometric accuracy you need to really differentiate between different layers, right? So distortion correction might be you might not be able to escape this, no matter how much you want to. And I haven't been able to escape it either. So let's see what it takes to do that.
You seem to have influence.
Sorry? Just that? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so I want to first thank both Saskia and Renzo for covering a lot of the physics and challenges of distortions yesterday, but still a quick recap. If you want a more detailed recap, please see Saskia's slides. So we know geometric distortions due to B0 inhomogeneity is what we refer to as EPI distortions, right? You can look at these images and you can see that they're just stretched weirdly, and the geometry is completely off in the EPI images. And this is primarily in the phase encode direction, which is the low bandwidth direction. And in case you guys are feeling very sleepy after lunch, I thought I'd put some numbers to wake you up. So if you have a typical EPI, right, 20 hertz per pixel bandwidth, yeah, that's very typical. So if you have a 120 hertz of field offset, that's like 6 voxel shift. Forget layers, you might not even be in the brain, right? So these are very severe distortions that we need to address to get the geometric accuracy of saying, oh, this functional signal is related to layer 4, right? And as Saskia already mentioned, the B0 inhomogeneity is primarily due to susceptibility changes in the brain, right? Renzo went through this whole process of how you shim, right? If you have in the walkthrough. So if you have bad shimming, you're going to get B0 offset. It could be a feature of your of the brain itself. So in other words, you can have iron in hemoglobin and tissue, or you can have air tissue pockets like the sinuses. They're all areas where you're going to they're going to have different susceptibility values, and hence the B0 field is going to get distorted. So it's something you cannot escape. The B0 field is going to get distorted just as a function of the brain that we are imaging, right? But there's another point which I would really like to point out, and I think that's very pertinent to high resolution imaging. We are pushing imaging limits. I think this came up multiple times yesterday, right? What does that mean? We are using these gradients at really high speeds, right? Or we are looking at new hardware, like the EPI, like your just head coils. Eddy currents are going to increase in all these factors, which means that you not only have to worry about susceptibility, you have to worry about eddy currents as well when it comes to high resolution imaging, and they can cause all these effects that I'm going to show you. And we'll talk more about eddy currents in the next few slides. But given this really quick recap, the problem here is that when you have these distortions, it's the heading, right? You want to register. How do you register with a distorted image? You want geometric accuracy because you want to know exactly where in the laminar is your signal coming from. Both of these factors, registration and geometric accuracy, suffer when you have these EPI distortions. So for the rest of the talk, given this recap, we are going to look at how do you estimate distortion, and then we're going to go to how do you correct for these distortions. And then finally, I'm going to tell you, well, if phase encode direction wasn't just enough to be distorted, with high resolution imaging, there's just going to be a lot more distortions that you have to be prepared for. So let's get started. The first and foremost, the most standard technique is a B0 field map. You acquire two echo times. You acquire two echo gradient echo data, which is basically two different echo times, just a flash scan. And the phase difference between these two echo times kind of gives you a measure of your B0 offset. Now this B0 offset is directly proportional to how much shift is there, or like how much is the geometric distortion in your data. And from that, you can estimate how much shift is there in your data and eventually correct for it. We'll go to the correction later. So it's based on pure MR physics, right? This is a product sequence that's pretty much available on any scanner that you have. You should be able to acquire a field map. And as you can see in this image, it's generally a smooth varying map. There are several software tools that's highlighted here, which will be able to help you in processing these field maps. Full disclosure, brain speed diffusion pipeline is something that I developed, so I just want that to be out there. So given this, what can go wrong? Well, there's plenty. First and foremost, field map itself can be distorted. But more importantly, if it was distorted in the exact same way as your EPI, that's fine. You can work with that. But no, how can our life be that easy, right? Field map is differently distorted, and definitely different from EPI, and that's why differently is underlined, right? So, and generally, you can think of it as because if you're acquiring these flash scans, a lot of times you have lower bandwidth, say in the readout direction. And you can get similar, for the same reason as you get EPI distortions, you can get the distortions in the readout direction for these field maps. Second, you can, if you have eddy currents are going to change the intensity. In other words, they're going to change this B0 offset that your field map is measuring. So instead of 6 voxel shift, it's going to tell you it's only 3 voxel shift, and you're going to correct for it. But guess what? That's not true, because eddy current has already distorted your field map itself, right? You have an incorrect measure of your voxel shift. The good thing is all these effects can be characterized by just varying acquisition parameters. So if you look at this particular image that I've shown you, there are two different TRs. Just look at different rows, okay? And you can see that just between 200 millisecond TR and a 500 millisecond TR, the intensity is very different. Why is it different? Well, because of short-term eddy currents. Short-term eddy currents can change these offset values. Similarly, if you kind of go to the readout direction, if you just changed your readout polarity and acquired 2 field maps, you will see if there's a shift between them. If there's a shift between them, then there is geometric distortion in them. And actually, you can kind of see that in these images, because what the bright area here is not same as the bright area here, actually. So if I had taken a difference in this direction, I would have seen some amount of,
Oh, wait, you were just using your pointer. I'll just give you the laser pointer to help.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. You should have turned it on.
Thanks. Yeah. So you can see like this bright region here versus this bright region here, which are scaled the same way. It's different. So if we actually took the difference in this phase encode and readout reverse direction, you would actually see an active amount of difference between them. And that's because of just distortions coming in to the field map. So some tips, how do you look for that? For eddy currents, you don't need to wait till your study. You can characterize them before, and you should. Check your scanner for these effects. Actually, if you look at our, this is a ISMRM abstract by John and me. So we've kind of characterized step by step on how you can calculate these effects. You can also, if you want to deal with short-term eddy current effects, you can also increase your TR of your field map as much as you can, and that kind of mitigates some of these effects. And secondly, you can just acquire reverse gradient reverse readout gradient field maps and see for yourself if there's distortions, or deal with, either add or subtract them to kind of look at susceptibility versus eddy current effects. So there are ways in which you can address these findings. That's what I want you to take away from this slide. Second, we are used to 2 echo field maps, right? So it sounds very simple to take phase difference, but these phase differences can be noisy, right? And so this is some really nice work by Jason Stockman, where he showed that, okay, if you just take, multiple echo times, and do the same estimate instead of just taking 2 echoes, you can actually increase the accuracy of your field map. You can increase the CNR between your field estimate, between your gray and white matter. And overall, just you can see for yourself, there's an improvement in SNR because you just have more data that you're estimating these field maps from. So that's another way in which you might want to measure a field map in your study. There's a lot more considerations. Now, in a typical study, you will acquire 1 field map in a session. But what if there's motion, or these are high resolution scans, maybe something changes in your scan conditions? Then those field maps will not be up to date, right? They're not going to be up to date with your data, and there's going to be errors when you're going to use them to correct. Second, we also saw this in the SWI slide that Saskia presented, and even Doug presented this earlier today, right? The edge of the head is where these field maps tend to be most inaccurate. It's unfortunate, but our signal kind of comes very close to that. So most of the existing software that I listed in the earlier slide will do some sort of careful extrapolation of the field. And these are always heuristic. It's a smoothly varying field. You use splines or some such smoothly varying polynomials to just extend. And if that's inaccurate, you're going to get errors there. The third one is something we already talked about, but it's important. Basically, your field map is going to be differently distorted. Even if you correct the distortions in your field map, it's going to be differently distorted from your EPI data, which means it's a tough registration problem. So if you have used a field map to register, to correct for distortions, please open your field map file, open your EPI file, and see if they're registered. If there are regions where there is misregistration, my suggestion would be throw out that data. Use a principled approach to not include that data, because your correction is not going to be accurate if there's misregistration between your distortion map and your data. And lastly, which is very important to high resolution field map, is that as we are increasing resolutions, these are flash scans. So field maps are time consuming to acquire, right? They are not going to be fast to acquire, and we're going to basically at some point not match the resolution of EPI, which means you're working with a lower resolution estimate on higher resolution data. That's important because it might miss out some really small features which are important to us, like, for example, unable to resolve signal from veins, right? We care about veins here. I hope everyone here cares about veins. Yeah. So that's important because there's iron in hemoglobin, right? So you're going to not be able to. Oh, really? Sorry. Okay, great. Yeah. Is that better? Okay. And that's going to be a problem for high resolution imaging. So we come to the next approach, which is acquiring reverse gradient scans. Again, this is a very popular approach where we acquire EPI images that are encoded in opposite phase encoding polarity. If you look at the images that I'm showing you here, there are 4 different phase encoding polarities. What do you see? Do you see different distortions in all of them? I hope that's what you see, like they're differently distorted. And so it's a smart way of controlling the direction of distortion. So we won't acquire 4, generally we will acquire 2. And one, say we acquire this AP and PA, they have 2 different distortions. And then there are methods such as the FSL stop-up software package. What it will do is it will register these 2 images. And when you register the warp or deformation that is estimated to perform this registration is your field map, is your distortion map. Okay, I hope that's clear. So the registration between these two differently distorted files, different EPIs will give you an estimation of your field. And one important point that I want to note, and I think Doug kept talking about dropouts, right? What is also commonly done is to estimate these deformation maps, we want to avoid dropouts, because if there's no signal, your estimate of your deformation there is going to be 0. So if you have a gradient echo reverse polarity scan, there might be the regions of dropouts are going to be inaccurate deformation estimation. So what is generally done is you acquire a spin echo reverse polarity to get an accurate distortion map. And then you can apply it to your gradient echo data. So that's generally done. And on that note, I want to show, and this is like this is my favorite figure of this entire talk I have. Anna, big shout out to you. Yeah, so this is work by Anna, where she's kind of shown, 3 different distortion maps, right? For the same data. You have a field map, you have a gradient echo based top-up estimate, and as well as spin echo based top-up estimate. Hopefully you can see that they're more or less, they agree with each other, right? And that gives you the confidence that these methods are working. This is important because the field map is an MR physics based estimate, while the top-up is a morphology registration based estimate. And if they agree, they converge, you kind of know that your distortion estimate is a reasonable one. And that's very important, and I'll come back to that point in the next slide. There's still more. One of the advantages with respect to high resolution functional imaging for these reverse gradient type of acquisition is that they are the same resolution as your EPI data, right? You remember your field map becomes time consuming when you go to higher resolutions. You won't face that kind of problem with this approach because these are EPI, they can be acquired very fast. They are, FSL top-up is also quite fast in its estimation as well. So, everything fast, and that's a huge advantage here to high resolution imaging. However, it's registration. Nonlinear registrations errors are first of all very hard to find and validate, and it's an ill-posed problem with many solutions. Okay, so validation is a question. A lot of times the estimate that you're getting, is that a good estimate? Sure, registration works, but there are many solutions where registration will work. Does that solution match with the B0 field offset? Right? And another aspect that's important to just keep in mind, it's not an issue with low resolution scans, but with high resolution scans, we have these smoothness priors built into all of the estimations in this method. Is your field smooth at high resolution? Does iron in blood appear smooth in your field map, right? We don't know that, and maybe that's going to change as we push spatial resolution, which means maybe these smoothness priors are not going to work for us. They might work today, but it's something to keep in mind. And when it comes to the question of validation, and that's why I love this figure, if in your study you could acquire a field map, you could acquire a reverse gradient scan, and if you could just see that they agree, that gives a lot of validation that your distortion map estimate is reasonable. And I think that's something that might be easy to put in to whatever study you're planning. And help with this validation question that I posed earlier. So coming to the third, first and foremost, before I even begin this topic, I think I have to thank Doug, with all my heart. And please, I think he's presented a lot on BB register earlier. And so I'm not going to get into details of how this registration is done, but from just a different standpoint, this is also a nonlinear registration approach. Right? Very similar to nonlinear registration approach that I talked about just now with 2 different reverse gradient scans, with the difference that here the reference is either a T1 weighted image, or you can use a bold weighted flash image, which is also matched in contrast with your data. So you have a reference image here, and you perform nonlinear registration and the warp that is spit out from these nonlinear registration methods is nothing but your distortion map or your field map. Right? And there are several tools that look at volumetric registrations as well as surface-based. You saw several examples of surface-based. And so I thought it might be nice to look at an example with bold weighted flash and using AFNI's 3DQ warp here. And with that, we actually finished the first section and we're going to go into the next section with that example. So we acquired some visual cortex data, and you can see head foot was our phase encode direction, and you can see there's just a ton of distortion. I'm just toggling between them, right? That's a lot of distortions. Then we also acquired a bowl weighted flash reference. So one thing to note compared to a T1 weighted reference that I think you saw in Doug's talk is that these are contrast matched somewhat to your data, right? The contrast is similar. So the registration problem becomes more about similar contrast registration. And here's like the result from the AFNI's 3EQ work. You immediately see that it's kind of registered pretty well. But if I kind of go back to the original, that was not registered at all, right? So the registration has worked. Now I want you to focus on this part of the cerebellum and this area of the visual cortex. What do you think? Do you think that has really worked? Let me help you a little bit more. Let me go between foot to head and head to foot. Do you think they're registered there? How many of you say yes, and how many of you say, okay, no is please hands up. Thank you. No, that's bad registration in that area and this area, okay? And that's how you figure out how to leave out certain voxels, right? These are also regions. I'm sorry, I don't have the distortion map. I wish I had that. But you would see in those regions, there will be huge susceptibility differences, huge P0 offset. And maybe a threshold of that offset is what you need to, in your study to have a principled way of just leaving out certain voxels. So just to summarize what we saw in that example, our goal was to correct the intensities, right? What we would get without distortions. And we saw that the problem is ill-posed. It corrected in most regions, but there were a few regions where it did not correct. And you'd probably need priors, or you need a way, in a systematic way, to just leave out certain voxels if these methods don't work for you. And I do want to point out that these methods are doing two things. One, they're correcting geometry, which is basically a function of how good your distortion map is. But they're also correcting intensity. That's important. These methods are not directly just applying your distortion map to your data. They're also using an image neighborhood or some sort of a prior, spatial prior, to make those intensity estimates. Most commonly, I think you'll see Jacobian determinant or like least square space regularization kind of put in the cost function. But it's a function of both distortion map and the image neighborhood. So coming to singularities, like I think we cannot finish this discussion of correcting distortions without talking about pileups and dropouts, right? Because they make our life really hard. So singularities are deformations that can lead for multiple voxels to pile up into a single voxel. So there's a lot of voxel shift happening when you have geometric distortions. So if several voxels intensities collide into one voxel, separating them out to several is an ill-posed problem. In spin echo, I think that's the more well-known one, where you'll see like this really bright voxel that you're just not able to correct. But in gradient echo, the problem is, if you look at the top of this head, you see like this black, dark patch, low intensity patch. That's where the signal is lost. And even if you look at the corrected values, you're not going to be able to correct those regions because there's just no information there. These are locations of degeneracy, and there is just no solution. So it's not just many solutions is a problem. No solution is also a problem in case of these singularities, which is dropouts for gradient echo and pileups for spin echo. And in those cases, you just need more data. You need more. I would tell you ideally get reverse encode your entire time series, but that means you half your temporal resolution, and that's just not practical. Nobody does that, right? So again, leaving out voxels based on susceptibilities might be a practical solution to do in such scenarios where you're not able to correct for the inhomogeneities. Now comes to the last part of my talk. I'll be quick. There is unexpected distortions, not just in the phase encode direction. When with high resolution, you increase your resolution, you can imagine reduction in bandwidth is pretty common. And in those cases, you're just going to see distortions, not just in phase encode, but in readout and slice select as well. Here's an example from Anna again in the slice select direction, where what she's showing is very interesting. Top up will work to correct it. What she's showing is you can just reverse the gradient of that direction, and you will see the same kind of effect. And you can use FSL stop up to correct these distortions. I'm gonna skip some slides, but basically these distortions also affect your surfaces locations. So beyond distortion correction, after distortion correction, the surface location matches pretty well. And the last thing, like as a community, I know existing methods might not work well for high resolution. So there are field maps. In this particular thought experiment, there was a field map. I applied it. Clearly, there was a lot of degeneracy there. Applied with the smoothness prior, doesn't look that great. Added in some edge priors, and that looks more reasonable. So as just food for thought, maybe we need better priors for high resolution functional imaging, like these edge preserving ones. To conclude, I would say these are two topics that John's going to talk to you a lot about. I just wanted to mention it. We can also apply the warp to a structural image that you have acquired so that you work in the API space. That's not going to work for geometric accuracy, but again, something John's going to talk a lot about. And no matter what regions of distortions, you're not going to get the same resolution as you acquired. And that's something very important because your voxels are all warped, right? So you are decreasing resolution in regions of distortion, and therefore using susceptibility maps and thresholding them might be a good way to handle this decrease in resolution for laminar fMRI. To conclude, we reviewed a few classical distortion correction methods and discussed some practical steps, and hopefully gave you some sort of practical understanding on what you can do for your study. Thank you. Thanks to all the organizers and people who helped me with my slides and my group. Sorry for going about time.